Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Real Estate Investing. I'm your host, Sharon Barnholt, and I'm so glad you're tuning in today. While I was in Orlando doing an event back in the spring, I met an amazing photographer named Natalie Jennings. And I had the pleasure of doing some work out with her while I was out there. Now, for someone that hates having a photo shoot like me, it's kind of like having a root canal. Finding someone that actually made it pleasant to do the photo shoot, although I was anything but the ideal candidate, she would probably own that one fully. I was able to do it, and we actually had a great time doing it. And I knew right from that time that I wanted to have her on the show. So Natalie earned a graduate degree in education in 2009, and she decided to go in a completely different direction. She quit her teaching job and she started Jennings Photo, and that's allowed her to travel the world. She's been a lot of places, and she's shared her work in a lot of major publications like the Atlantic and the Huffington Post. Now, one thing that I'm really anxious to talk to Natalie about is branding. She knows a lot about branding and about how to use photography, professional photography, to build a brand. So that's really what I want to talk about today. So welcome to the show, Natalie.
Thank you so much, Sharon. It's great to be here.
So I'm going to have you tell everyone a little bit about yourself, because I just really kind of hit the highlights.
Sure. So you're right. I used to be a teacher. I did my graduate work in education, and then I started noticing a lot of photography blogs cropping up, sort of right when everyone seemed to be interested in starting a blog or doing something online. And so I took my hobby and sort of transformed it into what became Jennings Photo, which is a photo studio based in Minneapolis. We have 4 associates. And since then, I kind of started out doing a lot of weddings and portraits, and it's evolved into a big part of it is now personal branding, which is what we're talking about today. And I think if you've been on Facebook or Instagram or any sort of platform online, you'll notice that more and more people are trying to take better photos of themselves to show off their brand, especially also because personal brands are now like a huge thing. So that's what I'm doing. I've been doing it full time almost 10 years now. And I've also started a podcast to help educate other new photographers on how to start, grow, and maintain photo businesses. It's been a lot of fun. And I've been coaching and mentoring photographers for the last 4 or 5 years now too. So yeah, it's just growing, and personal branding is certainly something that has become a main focus, no pun intended, for the business.
Well, it's huge. And there was a time when people could get away with, using their cell phones, and that would be all that they had. But today, the competition's pretty heavy. I mean, you look at these beautiful websites and you go, holy moly, I am totally missing the boat on the photography. And what I've learned too is once you have a photo shoot and you get a few basic photos, you really need a whole lot more. You need, and you're really good at not in studio photos. I'm not really sure what the correct term is, but like photos that show your real personality, so that when people show up on your website, they get a better picture of who you are.
Sure. And I think that's a great point that you bring up, just differentiating between the studio photography, which is totally valid and sometimes necessary. And you see that a lot on maybe like the staffing page for a corporate website or something like that. But I don't typically shoot. I don't have my own studio. I do, occasionally rent out space if it calls for it. But yeah, I would characterize my style as a lifestyle kind of photography, which really shows, for example, a branding shoot might include photos of someone with, a few photos of them with their dog or their family or something like that as part of the collection. And I think, the standard, I guess I call it like standard LinkedIn portrait photo, or someone sitting in a studio is
Mhm.
totally okay. But if you are a personal brand and
Mhm.
you have a personality that you're trying to convey behind that brand, your photos are an incredibly quick and easy way to do that, because
Mhm.
people absorb information visually much, much quicker than they do reading or listening. So
Right. So, in today's world, you need an edge. I mean, you need an
yeah.
edge. You really do, because with the internet, there are so many people out there. You need a way to stand out from your competition. And I think visual content and video too, there's certainly a big place for like about me videos and things like that. But your visual content is a big part of telling people who you are and when they're choosing who they're going to work with.
That's right. I think it's if you have a good visual first impression, we all know that people don't stay on websites when they first land
Mm,
for very long at all. I
yeah.
believe it's only a few seconds. So if the competition is going to continue to grow and be more fierce, I think that that's a
Mhm.
huge thing to consider if you are running a business or you're a personal brand, to make sure that that first 2-3 seconds make an impact for people.
Yeah. So, and I tell people all the time, marketing is how you get leads for your business, and in my case, is how you get leads for hopefully real estate deals. But your branding is what makes them choose you. So you have to take advantage of every necessary or every available advantage, and one of them being photographs, to be the person that is memorable. It up levels your market in every way to have a good visual branding.
That's right. And differentiating between the marketing and the branding. And branding is the experience, the overall experience that people have when they're interacting with your product or your company or your brand. And so if you have a strong visual component to that,
Mhm.
if you're, for example, wanting to show a lighthearted, energetic, bright energy, you can do that really, really effectively with a great photo collection, and people will continue to remember that in a visual way, in a much stronger way, I think, than some of the other things you might be able to do with great copy and other things. So I
Yeah,
think
it
that's,
really is a picture's worth 1,000 words.
yeah.
I mean, it really is that. And, you can tell, like, for instance, when I asked you for a headshot, you sent me this great, energetic picture. I mean, it just shows your personality. And um, I think sometimes people from my generation, we tend to take ourselves too seriously. We didn't grow up in the digital world of where 18-year-olds snap 500 selfies a day. It's just it's a whole different way of being. Getting people together and lining them up for a photo was a great big giant deal, and everybody's going, "Oh no, I got to do this again." But the photography, as it pertains to marketing and branding, you nailed it. Branding is the way people feel about you. And some people say it's what they say about you after you leave the room. So,
Jeff Bezos said that, actually. Yeah.
yeah. So, we had this conversation before we started. Someone said, we were talking about branding, so I should get a business card. And well, no, that's not branding, but yes, you should have a business card. So there's the visual side of branding, and then there's the whole persona that you create with your, like you said, the way people feel about you. But if you have terrible pictures on your website, it's a negative. I mean, you'd be better off to have no pictures than some of these terrible pictures.
I absolutely agree with you on that piece. Photography is so accessible now that if you're not thinking about hiring a photographer to up your website, like if people land on a page that doesn't look like it's been updated in a long time,
Mm-hmm.
people aren't going to stay. Like I said, even a great website, people are still only giving you a few seconds before they decide if they want to take
Right.
off. And I like what you said about having sort of I think business used to have, as you mentioned, a more serious vibe. Everyone really took themselves seriously. And I think photography, great branding photography, can really help people in businesses and industries that might actually be a little bit more serious. People are making a big investment in something and they're trusting you, or they're going to you for their healthcare, or they're going to you for something that is maybe a little bit heavier and a little bit you know, like a big decision. And
Right.
if you have a warm, inviting, vibrant sort of energy that you're conveying from the second that people land on your site before they even interact with you, they're going to be so much more inclined to want to hire you and want to get to know you. So
yeah, I think it gives you a marketing edge that's really hard to put into words. Like you said, when somebody lands on your website, you've got a few seconds to grab their attention, and if you can do that with a photograph, you know, I go back to Marie Forleo, who has a stellar photographic brand. Even Amy Porterfield, we call Amy the queen of the internet. She's very purposeful about her pictures, and even something I want to talk about a little bit about the colors she wears. She slides them in to her brand colors. So I don't know. In any business, I think your media is a huge part of who you are and about it sets you apart. It gives you an extra layer of credibility from your competition. I'm sure you would probably agree with that.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that there's one thing that's interesting is I think that there's a misunderstanding with branding that it is just, you mentioned the business card thing, that it is just colors, you know, but it's this interesting blend of being able to tell a story. We hear that term all the time in business now and marketing, and taking those elements of a good brand, which I believe starts with consistency, so that when people are returning to your site, they're experiencing a bit of a narrative through the photographs and images, but they're also instantly comfortable because they recognize everything else that you've woven in, like the colors and the experience and the UX and all that kind of stuff. So,
right. The consistency is important when it comes to, if you go back to the visual aspects and you're talking about fonts and colors, when people go, if they, for instance, I'm in the middle of doing a rebrand. So that when they go back to the blog or the podcast, they go across the different platforms, there is a definite consistency of all of those things. And, you know, it requires some thought and some planning. And I think most people, especially people that started out 5-10 years ago with blogging or podcasting, it wasn't the first thought on our minds because we were more worried about, you know, we were kind of in the more beginning of all of that. And now you've got to go back and go, well, wait a minute, you know, I completely missed this piece. So for someone that's just starting out, or even if you're not starting out, you need to have a Natalie to help you create a consistent brand presence. And I want to circle back to something that we talked about briefly about the colors. I always think about Amy Porterfield. Now, if you look at her website, and she likes yellow. Not all of her pictures are yellow, but she definitely has a picture with her yellow shirt, and she has her yellow buttons. But you can look at anything she does over the years, and you can go, recent years, that's her brand. You know, Marie Forleo, who's just bigger than life, she has built an absolute gigantic brand, mostly with pictures and videos. So anybody can do that to a lesser extent. But what do you tell people about colors? So if you have a brand, colors that are very specific to your brand, should they be included, some aspect of that in your photo shoot, or what's your advice on that?
Sure. I think it's definitely beneficial to consider that. I specifically at Jennings Photo, we offer a few different levels of headshot and branding packages. And our more involved packages, our top packages, include sitting down and talking about color palettes and talking about where we're going to shoot specifically. And I think the reason for that is that back to consistency, because photos are everywhere now and people have these beautiful Instagram feeds and beautiful websites, just staying consistent with your brand and the colors that you've chosen can give people more confidence almost in what you do. I think it's sort of like when you go into a restaurant, for example, and it's beautifully decorated and very clean and very bright, and you want to sit down and eat. And it might have, you know, like, who knows what the food's like, but getting you in the door is a huge thing. Whereas you could be amazing at what you do, and you may have this brand that you're building, and a business that you can do really well at, but if someone walks in your door and it looks a little bit of a mess, and you're not being consistent with your colors, and one day it's blue and one day it's red, and your photos are kind of sometimes bright and sometimes dark, and they look like you've used 10 different filters, it I think conveys sort of like just a different message, where maybe even if you're good at what you do, you might not be conveying that in your photos. And so considering working with a professional to achieve that consistency, I think is really effective for a lot of people. And you've brought up a couple of powerhouses that do it very well. And that's, if you've never heard of someone and you check them out, and you start to really make those associations with the quality of their work too.
Yeah, it's amazing. And, for the longest time, when you start seeing things, I have a visitor, sorry. You start seeing things that other people are doing. And I think that was really, some people were definitely on the forefront of that. People that are not photographers, they would just say, well, wait a minute, you look and go, well, they're doing A, B, and C. So I think they've been a kind of educating the world about the way things should be.
That's right. And I think that, part of that is, choosing the right photos for your brand and figuring out kind of what that is. Because nowadays everything is so, there is a lot going on, and it's like you said, a lot of competition. So I think what they've done really well is choosing the right photos and the right way to convey their message. So that's not an easy thing to do necessarily if you're trying to do it all on your own.
No, it's not. And I look at personal branding as being an investment in your future, in your business. And if people think, oh, well, it's going to cost this much money, but you really cannot think about it that way, because the whole brand you build, which includes your pictures, that goes to your credibility, and it goes to people's buying decisions. For you as a photographer, certainly it goes to whether or not people are going to hire you. But even in my business, people look at that and they notice that you have a brand, because they'll say, oh, well, you talk about branding a lot, and it's like. But there are people that in the real estate world who have never thought anything about branding are now going, wait a minute, other than what I call the realtor headshots, the ones where they lean way in and they, those things.
Right.
Those. So I don't know. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, I felt lucky to just kind of find you, and that's what it was. We were at the same event. And, but how does somebody go about finding a photographer to do the kind of work that they want? Because I've made a couple of mistakes when trying to hire a videographer, and part of it was my fault. I would ask for a videographer when I needed maybe a producer, someone that could help tell a story, which you touched on before. So that was on me. But let's say that someone is just looking for a photographer, and they look online, and there's all these companies, and they say, you can look at their work, but how do you really choose somebody that's going to be the right person for you?
That's a great question. And I think the first thing to sort of narrow down for the purpose of this conversation is, chances are folks that are listening are going to be looking for a personal brand photographer. So that's a term that's used a lot more these days, which will really, rather than just Googling photographer in Minneapolis. So that might help, because personal brand photographers are involved in sort of the lifestyle, styling, that kind of approach. So that would be the first thing I would do. But I know it kind of goes without saying, but photographers have the advantage of being able to show how good they are at what they do by being photographers and having a portfolio available. So the next thing I would do is really look at what they have available as examples on their website. And if the style is really inconsistent, or if it's not something that's quite matching up with what you're interested in, I certainly would continue to look. Inconsistency, again, even happens with photographers. So chances are there might be sort of, maybe someone's just getting started and they haven't found their style yet. But you may want to continue looking. And then if you're not really that into the the style that you're seeing. I've certainly been asked many times, like, I really like your photos, but could you do this, this, or this instead? They might just not be your ideal photographer. So
yeah, you may not be a fit for each other, which truthfully happens in business, and that's okay.
that's right. And then, obviously all the next things, like if the photographer is clear about what you can expect in the first steps, if they make it easy for you to contact them, if they get back to you at a reasonable amount of time, all of these things are part of what we talk about. It's part of the brand. And chances are you're going to have a better experience if all of these pieces are kind of in place, just like any business you choose to use. But the portfolio is really sort of the big one for photographers. If you don't see anything you like, they're probably not a good fit for you.
Yeah, and it is a big investment, and you have to even be comfortable with that person as far as personality wise. There has to be a certain I don't know, just a way of being with that person. Otherwise, it's just not going to work.
That's right. And I mentioned that I started out shooting a lot of weddings. I still occasionally do, but if you're not getting along with your photographer and they're going to be working with you in such an intimate space, and this sort of, a lot of people, and you've mentioned it too, are not comfortable in front of a camera. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of professionals sort of avoid doing the professional branding shoot, because it's like, I don't want to get in front of the camera. But that energy and that rapport can really relax you. And if a photographer is good at what they do, they'll be able to capture some of those in-between moments that you didn't even really notice you were capable of doing. And I think that's really important as well.
Well, and you're especially good at that. So
thank
just
you.
If anybody's in Minneapolis, you should go see Natalie. So how do you prepare for a photo shoot? What do you have some tips on that?
Sure. From the client's perspective, if you're the one being photographed, I certainly always start with just be yourself. So I think the tendency with a lot of people when they are, no matter what type of photo shoot it is to sort of like get overly dressed up and I got to buy 10 new outfits that I normally would never wear, or start with things that are you, that you're comfortable in, that you may want to purchase a new shirt or a suit or whatever it is that you want to bring to the shoot. But ultimately, you're going to feel more comfortable and you're going to behave more relaxed and you're going to show more of yourself if you're not suddenly in a space and in a physical outfit that you would normally never do. So I think that's the first thing, is just sort of thinking about what you're drawn to. Like I said, branding sessions for any sort of personal brand can be hanging out with your kids or your dog, or maybe you like to garden. So these can be worked into a session. And a lot of them, especially on Instagram or about pages for your website, like this is where people are showing that little piece of personality. And so if you land on someone's site and you see that, oh, they like dogs or they have a cat or whatever, I mean, that you may be only thinking like, how could I take photos that represent my business? But you're really wanting to show people who you are. So the first step would be to think about what really represents you and what you're comfortable in, and then go from there. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you recommend in a normal photo shoot, do you recommend that people bring like a couple of outfits, or how does that work?
Yeah. So in all of the photo shoots, whether it's a quick headshot session or a full branding collection, I definitely suggest a couple of outfit changes. So the branding collections allow for half or full day shoots. So this is like many different environments, many different looks. So it kind of looks like you have a collection doing a whole bunch of different things on different days. But even just a blazer or a sweater that you can take on and off, or your glasses, or changing out your jewelry, or, there's lots of little things, your tie, or there's things you can do in a very, very, very small window that allow for a variety of photos that sort of make it look like you took them on different days. But I definitely think one or two changes for any collection of photos is useful, because nowadays we're asked on so many different platforms to provide people with photos of ourselves. And it was easy not long ago to just get stuck using the same headshot for
Mhm.
everything. So I think just any way that you can inject a little bit of variety into your photo collection, if you're taking the time to hire a professional, is really helpful.
So I got an interesting question the other day from someone that I know, and she said, "I don't normally wear a lot of makeup. Do I need to put on makeup for the photo shoot?"
Well, this is an interesting thing because I too don't usually. One thing that the camera does, and it does it with everyone, and this is why people are so heavily made up for television and movies,
Yeah.
is that the camera sort of just like takes away almost half of what you have on your
Yeah.
face. So I say try and be yourself and be comfortable, but if you
Mhm.
do want it to look like you have a little bit of color to your face, if you're wearing makeup, if if that's what you do, then I would recommend putting a little more on than you normally would, not to a point where you're uncomfortable, because you don't want to be uncomfortable, but trust that it's not going to look that way in the photograph, because the camera just doesn't pick up all of it, and that's a real thing. And for however you identify, male, female, whatever your identification is, like a little bit of makeup certainly can help. So just even with a little bit of shine, but it's not necessary. So
So on so that's a thing to consider. And then the other thing that is always so tough if you're more than 30 is the camera picks up every tiny little imperfection.
Yeah, that's definitely something that happens, and we all have things that we want to change, whether it's like, can you whiten my teeth or remove this blemish or wrinkle or whatever. And what I say to that, I think a good photographer will work with you on that. My approach is that I like to do a general edit of all of the images and deliver them to the client. And then if there are favorites that, then we can go back together and for a small fee, like really work out all those specifics in the editing, and some more intense editing, because I don't like to assume that somebody does or doesn't want something in their photos. So, because that's a really personal thing. Some people might not mind if they have a certain amount of wrinkles or if they have a blemish. Maybe it's part of like who they are, and that's fine. So I don't take the liberty to make that decision, but I certainly am open to working with people to come up with something that, again, I'm not a big fan of overly photoshopped things either. So what we try to achieve with this natural approach that we do, or this lifestyle approach, is just a sense of like a real life you. And so
Maybe a slightly better of a real life version. No, you do a great job of that. So I apologize. My neighbor's dog walked outside my window and was barking. So sorry about that.
that's all right. That's all right.
Well, thanks so much, Natalie, for coming on the show today. I get a lot of questions about this, and I know you're a photographer. You're obviously great in front of the camera as well as behind the camera, but it's a tough thing for so many people. They're just, they weren't brought up in the selfie age and the cameras everywhere age, and so it's a tough thing for them, and getting across to them the fact that they really need to do this. They really need to spend the money to do this is a topic I've been wanting to cover for a long time. So thank you so much for going into that and reinforcing that people need to do this for their personal branding. And by doing that, all of their marketing will work better.
That's right. And it really is super accessible. The collections that we offer, we price it based on a photo per month. So for example, if you want to do a month collection, that would essentially give you a photo every day for Instagram. Some of it might be your product, say you're a chef or something. Some of the photos might be food that you've cooked. Some of it might be you and your dog. Some of it might be you just portraits or cooking. There's all these different ways to show your brand, but because photography isn't, the big expensive film, literal film and negative thing that it used to be, we can offer people really easy ways over a long period of time to have fresh content. And so if you were to, you will spend money with a good, like some of our big branding packages. But if you spread that out over even a year, it's really not that much at all. You know,
Yeah.
it's like your coffee for the morning, and you have this beautiful image that's fresh all the time. So
That's a great idea. I never thought about that, but you know, to do it, people will go, okay, I'm going to have a branding shoot in June or whatever. So yeah, that's something to think about doing more frequent pictures. I never gave that a thought.
yeah, we do a seasonal option. So every quarter, we would plan some, because you're changing, your brand is changing, the weather's changing, your products might be changing, you know, either biannually or quarterly. We offer packages where people will work with us to get that quarter's worth of photos. So it might be very spring themed or something. And then because generally you don't change that much in a year, you can go back and reuse as you're shooting, and you suddenly have this amazing catalog of images to share regularly that seem fresh and put together. They're on brand. You've taken into consideration what you were wearing and your colors and all this stuff. So you're not frantically trying to find a photo for the day for your Instagram feed. It's just kind of already, you know, in 1 or 2 days of shooting, it's just done for you for the year. So
wow, that's amazing. You've given me a lot to think about. Giving me some more work. Well, tell me before we wrap this up. I know the best way. What's the best way to reach you?
Sure. My website is www.jennings.photo, and I say the .photo because people are like, wait, .com. So it's jennings.photo. One of the things that we talk about when we work with clients is asking them who their ideal client is. Like, who are you trying to reach? What's the vibe that you're trying to put out? And that's something that surprisingly really sit down and consider, like who they're trying to attract. And so if you go to jennings.photo/ideal client, I have a thing, if this is something that interests you as you're listening, that kind of walks you through the first steps into identifying that person, so that you know who you're doing all of these photos for and all of this marketing to and all that kind of stuff. So
that's a great idea, because we do that for marketing, but doing that for photos, that's actually a really great idea. Now, tell everybody how they can listen to your brand new podcast.
Sure. So you can go to jennings.photo/subscribe, and that takes you right to the, there's just a page where you can choose your favorite podcast listener app. So we're on everything, iTunes, Overcast. So jennings.photo/subscribe, and jennings.photo for everything else.
That's easy enough to remember.
Yeah, I try to keep it simple.
Well, that's the best way. That's from a branding perspective, that's the best way. So, well, thanks so much, Natalie. And I will plan to see you at the next PodFest. Maybe I can think of a reason. I could think of coming up to Minneapolis in warm weather, maybe.
Yeah, well, I travel a great deal. So if anyone's listening that's not in Minneapolis, I certainly shoot all over the country and the world. So that's
very cool. She might be in your area, so you need to check.
Yeah, absolutely do. It's happened many times before where, hey, are you in this city? And I happen to be. So
well, if you come to my city, you'll have to let me know.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sharon.
Well, thank you for coming on the show, and thanks in advance to everyone that's tuning in today. And I'll see you next week, same time, same place. Bye for now.